be over here. Actually, I'm not even going to sit up here yet.
All right, I think we're going to get started, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joanna Bond, and I'm the relatively new dean of Rutgers Law School. I started in July, and I am absolutely thrilled to be at this extraordinary institution. And the fun thing for me about tonight is that I have now been here long enough that I look out into the crowd and I see people that I recognize, which is wonderful. That feels like a landmark for me. So it's my true pleasure to be here tonight and to introduce Melissa Riley, who is going to introduce our speaker. And I'm going to say just a brief word about Melissa. I'm sure that I always embarrass her, but she is an extraordinary leader of our Alumni Association, and we're very, very lucky to have her. So I'm about to turn it over to Melissa, but I wanted to just thank you all for coming out tonight for the Weintraub lecture. It's a very meaningful event for the law school, and we are so happy that you've joined us tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dean Bond. Welcome, members of the judiciary, faculty, students, and fellow alumni to the 38th Annual Chief Justice Joseph Weintraub Lecture. A mouthful. First, I'd like to thank Dean Bond and the law school for facilitating and co-sponsoring this event tonight with the Alumni Association, and Dean Bond for your kind words. Only slight embarrassment and a little blush. I'd also like to thank Dean Steinbaum for helping organize, market, and facilitate tonight's wonderful event. And special thanks to Mark McHale, Pat English, and Brian Biglin of the Alumni Association. They were our members of the board that really undertook the coordination and champion this event on behalf of the board. And if you know them, if either one of them alone was planning an event, it would be a success. So with the three of them together, I know it's going to be a great night. So if you're unfamiliar with Chief Justice Joseph Weintraub, his career and legacy, he's the second Chief Justice of New Jersey Supreme Court, having been appointed in 1957. During his 16 years as Chief Justice, he became quickly known for his clear and concise opinions, which were intended to be easily digested by lawyers, judges, and the public. And the Chief Justice had his fair share of written opinions, in addition to his daily administrative tasks that come with being the chief. He authored more majority opinions than any other member of the New Jersey Supreme Court during his tenure. And notably, he didn't shy away from those cases that were the most controversial. Instead, he felt it was his duty as Chief Justice to be the person to take on those challenges. His decisions were based not on constitutional and statutory principles, but also on common sense, public interest, principles of equity, and even human rights, such as in a case involving a migrant farm worker's right to access government services. Chief Justice Weintraub was also known for his analytical genius and deep understanding of constitutional law. He was not afraid to challenge conventional legal analysis to reach an equitable and just result. Today, we commemorate the legacy of Chief Justice Joseph Weintraub through this lecture series. It's one of the Alumni Association's signature events throughout the year, which it co-hosts with the law school. And this year, we are delighted to welcome, as lecturer, Judge Zahid Qureshi. Judge Qureshi began his judicial career in 2019 when he was appointed the position of Magistrate Judge of the New Jersey District Court. On March 30th, 2021, after only 2 years on the bench, President Joe Biden announced his intent to nominate Judge Qureshi to serve as a district judge. His nomination was sent to the Senate, and that April it was sent to the Senate, and he was confirmed on June 10th, 2021. Judge Qureshi became the first Muslim American to serve as a federal court judge as an Article III judge. His undeniable success and monumental achievements have made him the obvious and perfect candidate last year for the Alumni Association's Distinguished Alumni Award. Before his rise to the bench, Judge Qureshi began his law career here at Rutgers Law. After law school, he served as a law clerk and then a litigation associate before joining the U.S. Army Advocate General Corps, obtaining the role of captain before his honorable discharge in 2007. During his service with JAG, Judge Qureshi was stationed in Germany and deployed to Iraq twice, first in 2004 and then again in 2006. His lecture today, titled, "Thank You for Your Service, More Than Words, Issues Confronting Veterans and the Role of the Federal Courts," is therefore very close to his heart. But Judge Qureshi is so much more than what you can just read in a news article or find out on Wikipedia. Having spent some time with him at Rutgers Law alumni events the past few years, it didn't take long to notice his commitment to mentorship and to Rutgers Law. Despite his busy schedule, he finds time to mentor Rutgers Law alumni and students, including through the Alumni Association's mentorship program, which we partner with the Women's Law Forum here at the law school. He's also extremely outgoing and friendly and has enough stories to keep you entertained for hours. Just one conversation will sure to make you laugh. We're honored to have him here tonight as our 38th annual Chief Justice Joseph Weintraub Lecturer. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Judge Zahid Qureshi.
You got this. You want this? Let me put my water here. Well, thank you, Melissa, for that very kind introduction. I don't know how personable I am, but we'll see. I've got some of my law clerks are here, so they're probably going to be required to agree with you. Well, first, let me just thank Rutgers Law School for inviting me to participate in this year's Weintraub lecture, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to give opening remarks as an introduction to tonight's discussion on a topic which is dear to my heart, as Melissa said, veterans. It's always a pleasure to return home to my law school where I began my legal career. When I think about my journey from Rutgers Law School to the federal bench, I cannot help but really reminisce about the past. And when doing so, I will tell you, especially for the younger lawyers, the journey itself has been much more important and impactful to me than the destination. My experience in both the public and private sectors, my successes and failures, and the lessons I've learned from them, the many wonderful friends, mentors, and colleagues I've encountered and made along the way, all originate from my time at Rutgers Law School. And all of those experiences have shaped me, not only as a judge or a lawyer, but as a person. And so I appreciate some of my colleagues and friends are here today to support the law school and this lecture series. A special thanks to my law clerks, Argenta Caba and Taylor Lodies, who are here, both who graduated from Rutgers Law School and helped me prepare my remarks for this evening. I am truly honored to be selected to speak at this lecture series named after Chief Justice Joseph Weintraub. And I appreciate that Chief Justice Weintraub retired from the New Jersey Supreme Court in 1973, which I'll note was before I was born. But Chief Justice Weintraub's profound legacy proves that new generations of judges and lawyers have so much to learn from those who came before us. We should be mindful not to forget the past as we focus on our present work. And there are lessons we can all learn from Chief Justice Weintraub and others. In that vein, I'd like to begin by first mentioning a 1974 Cornell Law Review commemorative article about Chief Justice Weintraub that I came across entitled, "Joseph Weintraub, Judge for All Seasons." And if you have not read the article, I strongly encourage that you do so. Notably, I'd like to mention two takeaways from that article, both which I found meaningful as I continue my work as a judge today. The first takeaway is Chief Justice Weintraub's position on case assignments. Chief Justice believed that cases should be randomly assigned and that a cultivation of expert judges should be avoided. Chief Justice Weintraub specifically stated, and I'll quote it, "Judges bring different experiences to the court. There is a natural disposition to assign opinions on the basis of interest and background in particular subjects. This disposition should be resisted. If it is not, the work of the court in a given area may represent the thinking of but one man. More importantly, expertness may breed complacency and hamper rethinking or new thinking. Every member of a court should be expert in all matters. It calls for more work, but the dividends are rewarding, and in any event, The law should be the product of the entire court. And that was what Chief Justice Weintraub had said, and I could not agree more with the Chief Justice. Though he made these remarks while he was serving as a member of an appellate court, his words nevertheless ring true for district judges and our role on the federal trial level. As district judges, we are assigned cases in all areas of the law, from criminal to civil cases, including personal injury, employment discrimination, patent litigation, just to name a few. Candidly, most, if not all of us, have not previously practiced in all of these areas of law. But as judges, we take on all cases so that we too avoid becoming a court of one. The second takeaway that I did want to mention from that article about Chief Justice Weintraub was his strong opinion about judicial writing. He believed that judicial opinions should be short and that a judge should clearly explain why a prevailing party won its case and why the opposing party lost. The Chief Justice said he preferred, quote, a fair number of short, cryptic sentences which are easy to read and have more punch. He would go on to say, I like little words. They are spry. They dance. They paint pictures. I would not use a multi-syllable word when a four-letter word will do. A succession of ponderous words, usually of Latin derivation, lumbers along. They are drab, and their weight delays the reader. I will tell you that I personally subscribe to a similar philosophy. It is important to consider both what we say as judges and also how we say it, how our words, our opinions impact the most important members of our audience. And when I refer to the most important members of our audience, I do not mean the media. I do not mean politicians or colleagues or members of the bar, family or friends that want to read the work that we're doing, or even the general public for that matter. I'm referring to the actual parties in the specific cases, the plaintiffs and defendants we see, that we hear from, that we read about each day. I appreciate that we cannot please everyone as judges, and I appreciate that in most circumstances in our courthouse, there is a party that wins and a party that loses. But what is important is how we address those matters of importance. The manner in which we grant or deny relief being sought in our courts, that is a critical component of the job. I could continue discussing the legacy of Chief Justice Weintraub and all of the lessons to be learned from his time on the New Jersey Supreme Court, but I am mindful that I don't want to overstay my opening remarks, and we'll now transition to speak a bit about tonight's topic. Suffice it to say, though, being asked to speak here at this lecture series this year means a lot to me, and I'm very grateful to Rutgers Law School for the opportunity. Veterans. So considering that we celebrated Veterans Day just this past week, I'm mindful that this topic is rather still timely. I also appreciate that in the past, this lecture series has heard from various speakers discussing subjects such as judicial independence, judicial decision-making, and other similarly related legal issues. But when I was asked what I would like to speak about, I wanted to use this platform to discuss veterans because it is a subject that Melissa, I think, mentioned earlier is very important to me, and I feel should be one that is important to all Americans, all the time, not just on a single day of the year. For those of you who may not know or didn't listen to the intro or read Wikipedia, I am a U.S. Army veteran. I applied for a direct commission to the U.S. Army JAG Corps in 2002. I was accepted to the Officer Basic Course in 2003. I served for 4 years on active duty from 2003 to 2007 with the 1st Infantry Division, also known as the Big Red One, for anyone that has served, and where I was stationed in Schweinfurt, Germany, and I deployed to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2004 and again in 2006, and was then honorably discharged in 2007. I will tell you, I don't enjoy speaking about my military experience. It's not something that I do often, but I do understand that it's important for me to do so because it helps remind others of those who have served. And I don't mean me. I really do mean the brave men and women that I was so fortunate to serve with. That being said, I am very proud of my military service. It's an experience I hold very close to my heart, and it's why I wanted to take this opportunity this evening to highlight veterans for all of you. My time in the military had a tremendous impact on me, both personally and professionally. The military really allowed me to find my calling and mark the beginning of my career in public service. It was the very reason I continued to serve my country when I returned home, first working with the Department of Homeland Security and later with the United States Attorney's Office. And even when I returned to the private sector, I always itched in some way to return to public service. I was very fortunate to make that transition back to public service when I was selected to join the United States District Court here in New Jersey as a magistrate judge and now as a district judge. Zooming out of my personal experience, I do want to talk a bit about the status and vulnerabilities of veterans in the United States today. There are approximately 16.5 million veterans currently living in the United States. They make up 5 to 6% of America's population, and many of them have fought through some of our nation's longest and most grueling wars. Most recently, the war in Afghanistan was by far the longest war in U.S. history, stretching from 2001 to 2016 and killing over 1,800 U.S. troops in action, followed closely by the war in Iraq, which lasted nearly 9 years and killed over 3,500 U.S. troops in action. The effect of the post-9/11 wars on our veterans cannot be overstated. Nearly 3.8 million of today's American veterans served our country sometime since September 2001. American troops were fully withdrawn from Afghanistan 2 years ago, but already back in 2012, a reported 45% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans were seeking disability benefits for an average of 8 to 9 service-related injuries at a time. Some of them had up to 14 injuries. And more recent reports from the U.S. Census Bureau confirm that a staggering 1.5 million American veterans who served in the post-9/11 wars, over 1/3 of the total, have service-related disabilities. Post-9/11 veterans are not only more likely than other veterans to have service-related disabilities, even after age, health, sex, and economic resources are taken into account, but they also suffer from disabilities with the highest degree of severity out of all veteran groups. While many post-war disabilities manifest physically, a host of invisible disabilities that are equally prevalent among veterans pose serious concerns about their mental health and wellness. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, nearly 4 million veterans suffered from some form of mental illness in 2020. 20% of all veterans at the time. Veterans suffer from depression at a rate 5 times higher than civilians, and post-traumatic stress disorder at 15 times the rate of civilians. They are also particularly susceptible to suffering from traumatic brain injury, which can cause memory problems and mood swings, among other complications. Mental illness, including substance use disorders, is one of several risk factors for suicide. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs reports that an average of 17 veterans commit suicide every day. This number is an underestimation because it does not account for drug overdoses. A program called Operation Deep Dive studied data from the Department of Defense and various states that did include overdose statistics, and it found that the number of veteran suicides is closer to 24 per day on a national scale. Suicide is a grave concern, not just for veterans, but also for those actively serving our country in the military. In the first quarter of this year, the Department of Defense saw a 25% spike in active duty suicides compared to the first quarter of last year. An overall number of 94 active duty suicides from January to March 2023 is the highest that the military has seen since 97 were reported in the second quarter of 2021. In fact, there's been an overall increase in active duty suicides over the past decade. The Department of Defense, in response, has spent millions of dollars on suicide prevention efforts. Before I talk about legislative and judicial support for our veterans, much of which was put into place to help veteran suicide, I would like to emphasize that there are resources available if you or someone you know needs help. The Veterans Crisis Line is available 24/7 by calling 988, then selecting 1, or by texting 838-255. I'm going to repeat that. You can call the Veterans Crisis Line by calling 988, then selecting 1, or you can text 838-255. The U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs covers the cost of some emergency mental health care services, and you can find more comprehensive information and resources on their website at www.va.gov. Congress has recently passed laws that greatly increase support for our veterans and active service members, particularly in the areas of mental health care and benefits. Referred to as the most significant expansion of benefits and services for toxic exposed veterans in more than 30 years, the PACT Act went into effect last year, adding several presumptive conditions that are likely connected to military service when veterans seek health care or disability benefits. The Act added over 20 presumptive burn pit, Agent Orange, and other toxic exposure conditions that post-9/11 veterans specifically tend to face, along with a few other presumptive conditions faced by other veteran groups. Additionally, the Act now requires a toxic exposure screening for every veteran that is enrolled in health care through the Department of Veteran Affairs and provides opportunities for veterans to receive certain compensation payments. Equally instrumental is the Brandon Act, which was passed in December of 2021 but not implemented by the U.S. Department of Defense until May of this year. The Brandon Act directs military branches to establish procedures for how service members can request mental health referrals through their respective chains of command. These procedures will allow service members to seek mental health care confidentially and for any reason, and different plans are being put into place for implementing those procedures for active duty service members and for other troops. The program also calls for increased training and education within the military departments regarding mental health. On top of these recently passed laws, there are several other bills currently pending approval before Congress that would expand support for our veterans. There have also been developments to support veterans in our nation's judicial system, starting with the nation's first drug treatment court that was established exclusively for veterans in 2008 in Buffalo, New York. Other veterans-only courts were established shortly thereafter, leading to the creation of the Veterans Treatment Court Planning Initiative in 2010, followed by a separate appropriation in the U.S. Department of Justice for Veterans Treatment Courts in 2013. Most recently, Congress passed the Veterans Treatment Court Coordination Act of 2019, which established the Veterans Treatment Court Program to be managed by the Bureau of Justice Assistance of the U.S. Department of Justice and executed by the Attorney General. The program is designed to assist local and state governments and federally recognized Native American tribal governments. As described by the Obama administration's Office of National Drug Control Policy, veterans courts promote sobriety, recovery, and stability through a coordinated response involving the traditional partners found in drug courts and mental health courts, as well as the Department of Veterans Affairs, healthcare networks, the Veterans Benefits Administration, state departments of Veteran Affairs, volunteer veteran mentors, and veterans family support organizations. The state of New Jersey currently does not have a Veterans Treatment Court, but our state court system strives to reach similar goals through its Veterans Diversion Program. Enacted in 2017, New Jersey's Veteran Diversion Program directs select service members who have a mental illness and are charged with certain offenses in Superior Court or Municipal Court to community resources such as mental health counseling, job placement services, addiction services, rather than just putting them through the criminal justice system. Note, however, that none of the eligible offenses include violence or a threat of violence. Additionally, you can only be admitted to the program for a maximum of 2 years. So while this is a great start to providing veterans in New Jersey with mental health and substance abuse resources through our court system, there are obvious restrictions that make the current program far from inclusive. Now, while all of these state court programs aim to support veterans who suffer from mental health impairments more generally, I do just want to briefly note that there is one federal court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veteran Claims, that was created for the specific purpose of allowing veterans to appeal decisions by the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs denying them benefits. The court consists of a panel of 9 judges and has authority under the All Writs Act to compel the Department of Veteran Affairs to take action with respect to veterans' benefit applications. Now, you might all be thinking, what else can be done to address and support veterans-related matters in the federal judiciary? Well, several of us on the district court here in the District of New Jersey have been asking ourselves that same question. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that the District Court of New Jersey has been working on developing a Veterans Court. While we are still in the initial stages of collaborating with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Federal Public Defender's Office, the U.S. Probation Office, and the U.S. Pretrial Services, we are making significant progress. The purpose of our federal Veterans Court will be to track all defendants who are veterans charged in our court, regardless of any prior diagnosis, regardless of the charges they may be facing, to work with the Veteran Administration to ensure that these veterans receive the proper services and resources that may be available to them, including mental health and substance abuse treatment, housing and transportation, assistance, or any other resource related to issues they might be facing. Notably, our Veterans Court will seek to address the underlying causes of criminal conduct through alternative avenues in cases where traditional legal remedies alone are insufficient to tackle the root cause of the criminal conduct. Ultimately, and most importantly, the goal of this Veterans Court is twofold. First, the overarching goal is to improve the lives of veteran defendants by exposing them to certain services they may need. And second, Veterans Court also aims to promote public safety by supporting sobriety and law-abiding behavior by tackling and addressing relapse and recidivism. Because we anticipate all veteran defendants will be eligible to participate in this developing program, there is no guarantee that they will receive a more favorable disposition in the criminal case based on their participation in the program. That would ultimately be decided on a case-by-case basis. I am very proud to be working on this project with my colleagues and key members of our federal family, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to move forward with a proposal to the Board of Judges sometime next year. As I've just discussed, there are efforts being made at the state and federal level to address veteran-related concerns. I'll close my opening remarks by posing a question to the audience and then doing what judges do, answering that question for you. What can you do? I usually don't quote former presidents, but George Washington once profoundly said, "A nation is judged by how well it treats its veterans." We are a great nation, but we must do better by those who sacrifice so much for our country. We must not forget our veterans. And though the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan may be over, there is still a battle many of our veterans are fighting here at home. And as Americans, we need to do our part. So what can you do? Consider providing support to organizations that help our veterans. Organizations like the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VFW, or Wounded Warriors Project. You can dedicate your time or your wallet. I don't care. Time or money. That you can dedicate. And I will tell you that what I'm asking of you, whichever you can, remember that sacrifice I'm asking of you is far less than the one veterans gave willingly of themselves. I am very grateful for all of you to be here. I want to thank you all for your attention and for your consideration, and I look forward to the continued discussion with Mark McHale. So thank you for being here.
Judge, while you get down here, thank you for those opening remarks, and obviously thank you for your service. So I just want to go back to the beginning of your opening remarks and ask you a little bit more about your time in the military. Can you tell us?
The part that I don't like to talk about?
Yeah, right, the part that you don't like to talk about. Can you tell us a little bit about your time as a JAG officer and what your role was?
Absolutely. Like, what did I do as a
Yeah,
judge? What is a
exactly.
judge advocate?
Right,
I think this is an important question because I'm like, I joined the JAG Corps and I went to Iraq. And maybe that means nothing to some of you because you don't know specifically, well, what did you do as a judge advocate? So in the 4 years that I was active duty, I had several different roles. So the one that is most common, the one that you see on TV, like A Few Good Men, is I was a military prosecutor for two of my 4 years. So in some ways, that was transferable. The military rules of evidence mimic the federal rules of evidence, and although the process is slightly different with courts martials and things like that, that was for 2 of my years. I basically served as a military prosecutor with my brigade. That's about 5,000 soldiers. So any American soldier in my brigade who committed a crime, and for us that would be a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, I would advise commanders on what course of action to take. If it was an egregious misconduct that warranted a courts martial and for someone to be discharged, then I would be the lawyer in the courtroom trying that case. We also have what's called non-judicial punishment in the military, where if the infraction is maybe less egregious, commanders have the authority, and we recommend sometimes they can strip pay, they can take rank away from you, right, demote you, but you still get to continue to serve and you don't get kicked out of the Army. So one of the jobs that I did for at least 2 of the 4 years was serving as the prosecutor and the advisor to these commanders on all military justice issues. In Iraq, my jobs were different. So in 2004, when I first deployed, I was really new. I just left the officer basic course. They used to call me a baby captain when I was there. My boss, who was a West Point graduate infantryman who later went to law school, was almost angry that he waited 16 years for a war and I was there in 3 months. And so here we are getting our combat patches, being awarded them on the same day. And so in that role, I did things that were a little bit different. I would deal with the rules of engagement, right, on when we're authorized to use certain levels of force in a time of war, and I would brief commanders and their soldiers on the rules of engagement, the code of conduct, how do we treat detainees, things of that nature. In 2004, we were rebuilding an Iraqi army that we dismantled a year earlier, so we changed policy, and so we were there then trying to train Iraqi army personnel on following the code of conduct and rules of engagement that we had to abide by. So I did some of that work. I provided legal assistance to soldiers where they're deployed and they have legal issues back home. So to take that weight off of those guys that are fighting the war, we would address legal issues for them, and that was legal assistance. And it's not a coveted job. In fact, it's the job you usually get as a newer judge advocate, and I think it's one of the most important missions you can ever have, because you have folks that are in harm's way that are fighting a war, and if you can take a little bit of pressure off of them from home to deal with some legal issues so they can concentrate on the mission, I don't think there's anything more noble to do when you're serving. And then in 2006, I know this is a long question, I'll try to cut it. 2006, I was not a baby captain anymore. So there I asked to do detention operations, which is you're a legal advisor, but I'm reviewing evidence of detainees. So this has nothing to do with American soldiers. Insurgents that we are detaining, people think that the wars are being fought the same way. They're not. There are rules about what evidence is required to detain somebody, at least in Iraq, where I was deployed. You'd have to have photographs, 2 sworn statements from 2 soldiers that identify what is the reason why this individual is being detained. What is the evidence to support holding this person that you're alleging is an insurgent? So we would review those evidence packets, advise commanders on who to detain and release, and then ultimately, because it's a command-driven system, commanders ultimately make those decisions. Unlike assistant U.S. attorneys and civilian prosecutors in the state and local level, judge advocates, and that system is changing now a little bit with sexual assault cases and other cases where the military is moving away from command-driven military justice, and it's going to allow lawyers to make the call. But at the time that I was serving, I was advising commanders. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a picture of many of the different things. And then lastly, you could be a judge advocate and not have anything to do with your law degree. You've got to move these folks from Ramadi to Baghdad, and you have to transport these detainees, and you and the intel officer are 2 guys that are available to do it, and now you're sitting on a truck for 3 hours with your rifles hoping that the ground doesn't explode while you transport detainees from point A to point B. You don't need a law degree for that, but in a time of war, you'll be asked to do things on the ground just to assist, and I will tell you, I was more than happy to do. I would have swept sidewalks in Iraq if that's what would have helped those guys in the mission. So it's a lot of different things, but it's interesting because it may not be exactly what you see like in the movies or on TV, but it was very memorable for me.
Well, it's interesting, and especially having known you for all the years, I've never actually heard you give the detailed description.
You asked a question. I have an audience, and I think I'm required to answer these questions, or I probably wouldn't speak about it.
In your time as a JAG officer and touching on substance abuse and mental health issues, did you come across did you experience that with any either individuals that you were prosecuting or that were somehow or before you as a JAG officer? Was it prevalent at that time? Do you have a sense of if there's been any?
I mean, I think there's been significant improvements in awareness in the military since the time that I served, because I left in 2007, and you would think, well, 2007, that's not too long ago. It was when you're talking about where we were with mental health. That being said, I will tell you one story, because this is personal to me, because just because there were not programs in place didn't mean that commanders or I were not registering that there were potential issues. I remember in Iraq in 2006 in Ramadi, so the biggest kill in Iraq are IEDs, improvised explosive devices, right? Bombs in the road. That is your biggest threat in Iraq as a U.S. soldier or Marine or any other member of the coalition force. It's not going to be, it's unlikely to be a sniper attack or electrocuted in the shower, although that can happen because, you know, some of the equipment we had was not great, but it's IEDs. And I remember a soldier who had been hit 3 IEDs and lived, okay? This is like unheard of. He's a driver for a Bradley fighting vehicle. And I don't know, but there's trauma to being hit by an IED even if you survive it. And I remember this soldier couldn't leave the forward operating base. He was supposed to go out as a driver and he would like get sick, physically ill. And the commander, who I knew very well, we were very close friends, because you have to understand that company level commanders or captains, they're the same rank as the judge advocate advising him, right? The battalion commander has rank on me as a lieutenant colonel, brigade commander is a full bird colonel, commanding general is a general, but these company level commanders on the ground, they have the same rank. So we all knew each other. You know, we barbecued together in Germany. We lived in the same housing complex, right? Our significant others knew each other. So we could have frank conversations. And I remember a conversation where Adam would say, you know, Zot, what am I going to do with this guy? Like, do we got to court-martial him? Do I got to give him Article 15? And I remember saying to Adam, I said, how many IDs was this guy hit by? He's like, 3. And I go, and he's alive? And he's like, yeah. And I go, why don't you have him answer the phones at the forward operating base? I think he's done his time. And he's like, I can do that. I can just say he doesn't have to drive anymore. He can just sit and just answer the radios and just work at the Tactical Operations Center. I said, you absolutely can do that. Don't you think he's earned it? And he's like, you're right. And so there are times where I think we were slightly aware that, and look, if you ask me now, what's the diagnosis for that soldier who was like 18 years old? I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it was a mental health issue. I'm pretty sure he had such anxiety going outside the wire after living through 3 improvised explosive device explosions under his vehicle that it literally manifests into physical illness for him to even think about leaving the forward operating base. So I think we had some sensitivity to it, but if you're talking about formal policies that were in place where we were looking to identify it, I think we probably could have done much better. And I think the awareness now in 2023 is much greater than it was in 2003, 2004, 5, 6, and 7.
Right, and I know obviously you're not in the military at this point, but you've mentioned in our talks before that you've gotten a sense that there is more awareness currently, correct?
I think so. I mean, look, I mean, a lot of veterans do, but I stay connected to folks that I served with and members of the JAG Corps, and some of them are still in and some of them are out. And so I think now it's night and day of what they've been able to do, and even some of what Congress has done to really ensure that active duty, not wait for veterans, but active duty personnel are getting some process in place to get the treatment they need before, you know, something tragic like a suicide. I think there's been significant improvements, but at least that's what I hear. I'm not in the military anymore, but at least from discussions I've had with folks I've served with, it seems to be significantly improving.
So dovetailing off of that, obviously one of the big projects and kind of the centerpiece of tonight's discussion is the Veterans Court. Can you expand a little bit on the purpose or the goal of the project and how it's going to be implemented? What, you know, overall,
Sure.
give a more in-depth view of it.
Yeah, so I mean, look, our court already has 2 specialty programs. For those who are familiar with federal practice, we have a Renew Court, which is really a program designed to help integrate those who have significant terms of incarceration that have the highest rate of recidivism, right? And they meet other eligibility requirements. You know, no, it can't be a sex offender, it can't be certain things. We have a program to assist those folks reintegrate into society so they don't go back to the life that the only life they've known with their gangs and other crimes. So we have that program in place. But there are restrictions on who is eligible to be in that particular program, right? We have the pre-opportunity program, and I was speaking to Judge Keel earlier about this because he's one of the judges that is assigned those defendants, which is really almost like our federal drug court. And it used to be initially for certain defendants with substance abuse issues, but there are restrictions. Not every substance abuse defendant is eligible to be in the POP program, right? And also, it used to be solely related to drug offenses, but now I believe it's expanding beyond just drug-related crimes. But even there's restrictions, right? It can't be certain crimes of violence. You can't have had a firearm. There are certain offenses that make you ineligible to receive the treatment. And part of that, I think, is because if you're in the pre-opportunity program, if you get in and you complete it, it is highly likely you will get a non-custodial sentence, right? It's not necessarily written in stone, but the practice of that court has always been certain cases are selected because if they complete it, they would be eligible not to go to prison. Now, the Veterans Court design is very different than those 2 programs. We don't want to exclude veterans, right? If we make this program only for veterans who have committed nonviolent crimes, who have a diagnosis for mental illness, and all these other factors, we'll only get a very small percentage of veterans into that program. And so what we're looking to develop is one that attracts all veterans. Now, how do we do that? And that's discussions with these key players, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Public Defender's Office, pretrial probation. One of the key components, and I snuck it in a little bit in my remarks, is there's no guarantee on a favorable disposition in your case, right? I said that probably quickly, but think about that. If we do that, if we treat every case on a case-by-case basis, meaning, look, some are going to warrant some reduction. Some might warrant a non-custodial sentence, and some, you're going to prison. You completed this, you know, you committed an egregious crime. And even if you come through the program with treatment, there's going to be some punishment coming your way. So if we allow the program to treat all veterans on a case-by-case basis, it opens the door for us to allow all veterans in. And so that's really where the program is going. We're in the final kind of pieces putting it together, but that's where it is. So it's slightly different than the other programs we have because it's all-inclusive, but it comes with a price, and that price is there is no guarantee that at the end of this rainbow, you will get anything other than what services we were able to get to you. It could help you in your criminal case. It may not help you in your criminal case as far as disposition, but either way, we're going to be helping them because we can expose them to services that they need that they might have been neglected or not have had previously. So that's a little bit of the difference with this program moving forward.
And what, when you say services, what type of services are you envisioning providing? I know it's still in its working phases.
Yeah, well, I forgot one component. I keep talking about the key federal players in the program, but the VA is also involved in our veterans courts. I might want to mention them. So we have a very close connection to the Veterans Administration, and they're on board with this. We have our liaisons, and they have mental health, substance abuse, and other services that may be available. Now, it's also interesting, one question that's still up in the air, but it's worth just talking about is, well, what if the veteran has a dishonorable discharge, right? So if you're a veteran with a dishonorable discharge, you're not really entitled to benefits from the VA when you get out of the Army. It's almost like you might as well not have served because you have a dishonorable discharge, and that basically makes you ineligible for certain benefits. And in our discussions, we're thinking we shouldn't have eligibility requirements on the discharge because what if somebody's mental health issue was one of the reasons that triggered the dishonorable discharge? We don't know all the facts about a particular defendant who's a veteran, why they were discharged, what were the underlying bases. So to the extent that person can still get some assistance, whether through the VA or just housing assistance or other things that they might need, we've taken the position that we should be open to considering services to all veterans regardless of even discharge. But I don't know if that answers the question.
It does.
I might just be preaching about veterans court, and he's like, you're not talking about what I asked.
No, absolutely.
Nope, we're not doing that. Really? Do you see what's happening? Judge Vetcher has a question.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, Judge.
Wonderful.
So I assume that the veterans who would be eligible for this program would be those who are charged with the federal crime and arrested, right?
Correct.
So then say they don't make bail. Would there be any services still available to them?
Yeah, but it will be limited. So we have thought about, do we just exclude incarcerated defendants who are veterans because they can't necessarily get the same level of services as somebody who's out, right, who is on bail? And I think the discussion now is, look, there are still some services that can be provided to even incarcerated defendants, so why remove them from even those limited services? So we intend to include veteran defendants who are incarcerated or non-incarcerated. But the services are limited because you're right, Judge Vetcher. I mean, you know that there's certain treatments that can't be done in the prison. But it's the best we can do. And I guess we're trying to do something is better than nothing, even for those that are incarcerated.
So, no, no apologies. No, that was a good question, Judge. Thank you. Is there going to be a role or an opportunity for non-judiciary members to get involved? Do you think is it somebody like myself?
Yes, we actually this one you and I briefly just chatted about this the other day, and I put some thought to it because it wasn't something that we were developing. So different than like Renew Court, where we do have volunteer lawyers and they have issues. I hadn't really contemplated too much how the private or members of the bar could be involved or contribute, but there are some thoughts. So, for example, we have to identify veterans, right? And the program is designed that when somebody's arrested, pretrial services, which is the agency that immediately reviews a defendant, will be able to identify as part of their process who has served and who hasn't, and then develop the paperwork necessary to prove that this person is a veteran. But some people are going to be falling through the cracks, or somebody is going to be out, violate supervised release, and come back. And so it's incumbent upon the bar, especially lawyers who are representing defendants, to make sure that if you have a veteran defendant, you also can make what we call a referral. Now, because we're designing the program to include all veterans, that will be an easy process. I have a veteran, here's a DD-214 or some paperwork on his discharge. I'd like to make sure that you guys are tracking him in the Veterans Court. The other thing I didn't mention, but I do think it's important, the Veterans Court is a little bit like the POP program in that certain judges will be presiding over all the cases regarding these veteran defendants. There'll be some continuity in that process, right? As you develop and you learn more about veterans and what they're going through and evaluating sentencing disparity between them and others, a select few judges will be handling all of those cases. So it's not like throwing darts at a dartboard and you have to have all 17 district judges be a part of it and all the magistrate judges to be a part of it. So I just wanted to make that point that the program is designed for a small amount of judges to handle all the veteran defendants. They get reassigned to those judges. So again, this is in development, but we're close. But I think it's going to work a little bit like the POP program because it's not helpful to have every judge in the district doing their own thing because one is going to evaluate a defendant's prior service and participation in the program very differently than another. But if there's some continuity between just a handful or less, a few judges, and they're meeting regularly to discuss these veteran defendants, I think you get a consistency that we are trying to maintain on the district court. Sorry, Mark.
No, I have one last question for you, then I'm going to pass it off to the audience.
But Judge Betcher got her one, right? So she can't go twice. That's
Judge
the
Betcher-
rules.
she
I
can
read
get-
it somewhere in a memo.
Judge Petra can get as many as she wants. How do you think your military experience has shaped you as a judge? And I mean that not just broadly, because obviously we're seeing an example of that here in that you're going for this veterans court, right? You're spearheading this. Do you think you've had any influence in how you've decided criminal matters, civil matters, primarily most likely criminal matters, and have you had, obviously within the guidelines, have you been more lenient toward?
I mean, look, criminal matters, we were all different, but I'm pretty open about it. I've given downward variances and considered military service as
Right.
part of sentencing. Look, under 18 U.S.C. 3553, we're required to consider the characteristics of the defendant, and for me, that weighs a lot. That doesn't mean that it absolves you of the crime that you committed, but not only have I've considered that, I've had a defendant who was caring for an uncle who was a veteran, a Vietnam vet. And the things he did for him, that I considered pretty significant under 3553 when evaluating a sentence. So the problem with that is every judge will look at it differently. But if you're asking whether it has impact on criminal cases, for me, it absolutely does. And I don't know how it wouldn't, because take something else. If it wasn't serving your country in a war zone or a veteran, but it was some other good deed that you did, that I also would consider, right? Sometimes you get letters of support. The defendant is a great member of the community, and he does this for his church, and he's a great neighbor. And I evaluate all those things with some level of importance because it tells me more about John Doe than just, here's the crime that he committed. It tells me that there's a bigger picture to this person other than the instant offense. And I think we can all appreciate, whether we're judges or lawyers or just human beings, that even someone who's committed a serious crime, there may be more to that person than just the crime itself that's before you in the courtroom. So I think for us, I absolutely consider it. I would say my colleagues consider it too. I don't want to speak for them, but I think, of course, they're considering military service as part of the characteristics of a defendant, or something else, like caring for a veteran, which to me had significant impact recently in a case where he was really caring for this person who was living in his home. He was married, caring for his uncle who had mental health issues post-Vietnam, and to me, that was pretty significant, not to put a lot of weight to.
All right. Well, at this point, I'll open it up to the audience if anybody else has any questions. In the back.
Yeah, so I don't know if that may be a separate issue. You're talking about going back to the VA to get some greater entitlement to benefits that was denied to the veteran? So that may be something, but that will be separate apart from Veterans Court. It wouldn't be part of this process. I mean, look, there are certain services that we have the VA agreeing to give to certain veteran defendants as part of the program. But if you're asking whether we would then insert ourselves to advocate on behalf of these veterans to get, whatever the dispute was with the VA, maybe they didn't give them 100% disability. They gave them, you have 35% disability. I think the way we've contemplated it, at least at this juncture, although it's probably a topic I'm going to bring to the table, is that's probably a separate issue that would be resolved outside of the Veterans Court team. But I will bring that up at the next meeting to see, and get also what the VA's position is on that. Is there some way to intertwine the two? Because it might be easier if we can. So I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you we haven't thought about it as something that would be related, but I'm happy to bring it up to see if maybe I'm mistaken.
As a piggyback to that, has the VA, on the dishonorable discharges, has the VA still agreed to give the services?
Then we're going to have some trouble. So there's going to be limited services that we can give them, but the VA won't be assisting us with those particular individuals because our definition of veteran will be broader in scope than the VA. So we've had that discussion with them. They can't change that policy, but we said internally is that there are still services available to them, even outside the VA, that we can provide. And so we're like, why limit these veterans, even with dishonorable discharges, if we can get them some services? Although you're absolutely right, the VA, you're ineligible for VA benefits, with a dishonorable discharge. Sometimes if you have a bad conduct discharge, you lose certain eligibility for certain benefits from the VA, and we're not able to change that policy, right? All we can do is say, well, what little can we give these folks? Better something rather than nothing. I'm hopeful we don't have too many of those, but we may have a few that will have limited services, and that's the best we're going to be able to do. For now.
Dean?
I mean, honestly, I don't think we've had it. I will tell you, as far as the federal judiciary, I have not seen an obstacle. I have to tell you that it has been an amazing experience. So when this thought came up with a few of us to put it together, our Board of Judges unanimously agreed to form a committee to develop it. What's been taking time is that it takes, here's what takes time, Dean. Let's build a veterans court. Okay, well, how do we do it? And who are the key players that we need? We can't have a program without the U.S. Attorney Office saying, we will agree. Because the court has no jurisdiction to tell the U.S. Attorney, here's what you're going to charge and here's what you're going to recommend for the sentence, right? And this is what you're going to do. So we need to get the buy-in from them. Then we've got the defense bar. What are their issues with this? Then we've got probation and pretrial that have to deal with these veterans, right? Pretrial oversees them, probation supervises them. What are the obstacles for them to assist us with this program? What is doable, what's not? So I will tell you that it's been such a pleasant experience because I have not seen any obstacles other than time. You need time to work those issues out. You have to raise issues, and then folks have to go back to their teams and then come back from their offices. We can do that, but we can't do this. But we've been using the better part of this year to develop it, and I think we're in a good position by next year to submit a proposal to the board. But that's the real obstacle is you have this concept, right? We want to do better by veterans. Okay, that sounds great. Do you want a T-shirt, or are you going to do something about it? And for us to actually figure out what are we able to do that's not, lip service, that is a nice bullet for the law journal. Oh, look what we did. No, how do we actually help some of these guys? It takes time to build a program because the court can't do it by itself. We need the U.S. Attorney's Office, Public Defender's Office, the VA, probation, pretrial, and we have to get all of them to agree on the same message. And that's not easy, right? Because if you asked me, you'd have a defense counsel first saying, we want it to be if they complete the program, they get non-judicial and non-custodial punishment. They don't go to jail. And then you've got a prosecutor who's saying, wait a minute. So if the guy commits a crime of violence and he's looking at 20 years in prison, if he gets to the program and does some mental health treatment, we're going to let him walk. So you have to find some balance in the middle, right? You've got prosecutors and defense attorneys. You've got the court internal folks saying, well, how do we have the resources to do this? And I think that's what's been taking time. But I will tell you, it's been a very pleasant experience, very positive experience, and I am more than hopeful that we're going to get through this next year. And look, I just put the cart before the horse, right? Because I'm announcing something publicly, so now I force my colleagues to get this thing done by next year. And so I'm pretty sure they're going to be waiting for me. They're going to be waiting for me tomorrow to say, you got a minute? And so, but I always think, what better way to get it done but just put it out there, and now you got to make it so. So we are going to make it so, and I'm confident we will. And some of my colleagues are here, and some of them who serve on the committee with me, and they're probably thinking, what are you doing? But we're going to get it done by next year. Yeah, Chris. So we have, and we're in discussion. So first, we thought we could develop the mentorship program through the VA, but I'm not so sure we can. So we are in, it won't be part of the initial stages of the program, but we absolutely are considering veteran mentors because it's, I mean, it's like anything else, right? You know, I mean, I'm a veteran, so I guess I could probably talk to some of these folks and be part of that program, but veterans is a very unique demographic. So to have veterans involved as mentors in the program to guide them, folks that might have been through some of the issues they've been through, I think is absolutely important. It's something that we've been talking about. We initially thought we would get it through the VA, and we realized that that is not a service that's absolutely provided through them. So I think it's going to take some time, but it's a discussion we're having. And maybe going through the state to say, can we also use some of those resources to get additional mentors? And look, you also have to look at, well, how many, you know, veteran defendants do we have in our court? Right? We have to look at the numbers, and then you have to look at maybe, you know, the different risks. You know, maybe these veterans should be assigned mentors, but these guys don't need them as much, right? So I think that there are still things in development about whether we need a mentor for every veteran, or maybe there are certain veterans at risk that have a higher susceptibility to certain risks that they should have the mentorship first. But yeah, I appreciate that, Chris, and you're right. That's something that we still have to work on because we're not going to be able to get it through the VA. Yes. Oh, I'll take whatever you can give me. Sure. I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think it's an absolute tragedy, but I don't know what the Veterans Courts could be able to do about that. But yeah, I mean, some people should get involved in that to go get those guys their Purple Hearts because they've earned it. I mean, if that's what you're asking me, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, I'll give them my medals, but I think they've earned it. But I think you're going to have to advocate for that. So yeah, I mean, look, if there are folks interested, when we say how can we help veterans, and I'm saying time or money, that's a thing that you could put some time into is advocating and looking into that issue. And I think that would be great. I mean, look, if you're asking me, have they earned it? I think that's an absolute tragedy that folks aren't being awarded a Purple Heart when they literally were injured in combat. But I appreciate you putting that out there. Maybe some members of the audience, either live streaming or in person, might take up a little bit of that fight with you.
All right, we have time for, I think, one more question. Judge Vetro, what happened to your second question? All right, well, Judge, thank you once again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, guys.
Coming. If you were invited to the dinner tonight, it's going to be on the 3rd floor if you're one of the invited guests.
It's okay. You know I'm just joking. I'm just joking around.